super excited you're listening or watching. We have Pastor Rob Pierce with us. Rob, we're very happy to have you with us here.
Thank you, sir. This is quite an experiment. My name's Rob Pierce. I'm pastor at Latta Baptist in Latta, South Carolina. And this is Brad, my son-in-law. And we're not sure what to call this, but we're thinking the R&B show, because R&B certainly has a lot of different meanings, but rhythm and blues. But we may talk about music, but I think we're primarily going to talk about our lives and living out our lives in a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ.
That's right. That's exactly right. So first and foremost, had some people give us some kind of questions just to kind of get us started here. So some of our viewers, you guys, have asked, what is our favorite color is the question.
Favorite color? I have to say blue. I wear a lot of blue for some reason. I just like it. But I'm a South Carolina Gamecock fan and certainly like the garnet and black mixture there. Not sure about favorite color. I do like the North Carolina light blue because it's the color of the sky. Certainly, I went to Charleston Southern University, so I like the gold and blue mixture, but I'm not sure I have a favorite, but I certainly like the darker colors. Obviously, as a man of my small size, as you can see, or maybe can't see, I certainly like the darker colors and anything that fits me, so that's good too.
Right. My favorite color would be green. I don't really know why I've chosen green as my favorite color either. It's just always been my go-to when it comes to colors. However, I do like to wear blue a lot because I have blue eyes. I don't know if you can see that, but I have blue eyes, and I've heard that it pulls out the color of my eyes, so I like to wear blue a lot. So you mentioned you're the pastor at Latta Baptist Church.
Right.
So can you tell us the story about how you became a pastor?
Wow. Well, I grew up at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Florence, South Carolina. And went to church, was there almost all the time. My mom and dad made sure that we were in church. I went, my pastor was there from literally just a few months before I was born until I left and went to college. So Jerry Aiken was my pastor the entire time.
Right.
I had a good relationship with him and a good relationship with Jim Fincher, our minister of music. And he also did a lot of other roles as far as taking care of children's ministry and youth ministry and things of that nature. So I was raised in a church, and then I went to Baptist College at Charleston, which is now known as Charleston Southern University. And that's where Brad went as well. But enjoyed my time there. In fact, obviously, that's where I met my wife, Nancy. And while I was in college, I felt like that I needed to go into the ministry. I felt like God was leading me into the ministry. And a pastor called me. I was at the school my freshman year. And I was supposed to be out of the dormitory at 12 o'clock on a Wednesday, supposed to check out. Well, back then we didn't have cell phones, so we had the kind of phones you plug into the wall.
Right.
And so I had my phone plugged into the wall because my buddy Dale Poston from Florence was coming to pick me up as a favor to get me out of the dorm and get me back home for the summer. As I had the phone plugged up past the 12 noon cutoff time, to be out, he was running late. Of course, I didn't know it. The phone rang, and it was a fellow named Dale Lawson. Dale was a pastor at Brentwood Baptist Church in North Charleston. And Dale said, "Hey, man, I met you at a youth event, and I want you to come work with me as my associate pastor starting this fall." Well, this is not a job that I had applied for. This is not something I was searching for, but I'd been praying to God about, what do you want me to do with my life? I had no clue. A college freshman, all of a sudden I get an answer to that the very next day from God. So that summer, I went back to Florence. I went back to Francis Marion University and took some classes, and then went down to Charleston a couple of times during the summer to interview with the committee and with the pastor. Okay. And then I became their associate pastor in the fall of my sophomore year and stayed with that church in that time through my senior year. So I was there for just over 3 years.
3 years, okay.
And then at that point, I decided to go to Southwestern Baptist Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas.
Right.
And so we moved to Texas, got married right out of college, and we moved to Texas and got out there. And I had gotten an offer to go to work with Chick-fil-A from a letter from Mr. Truett Cathy, and I told him that I could not because I was going to the ministry. I got out to Texas, and the Chick-fil-A guy went to see him to get a job because every seminary student's looking just to make some money.
Especially at Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
Right?
So he said, "I don't have any jobs." He said, "What's your name?" I told him my name. And he said, "Oh, yeah, Mr. Cathy called me about you. You've got a job. You need to start tomorrow." So it was exciting. And went to seminary. But while I was at seminary, I changed jobs. I began to work at the Psychiatric Institute of Fort Worth. The reason I changed jobs because the pay was so much higher, and they gave us free health insurance, and that was just crucial for a seminary student and newly married. And so during that time, I got to meet some interesting people. Bob Weathers, who's now a pastor in Charlotte, North Carolina, met him there, and I also at church rather. And then I met Richard Blackaby, whose dad, Henry Blackaby, wrote the book Experiencing God.
Yep.
And Richard, of course, is now the president of Blackaby Ministries. His dad's in heaven. But in fact, we just had him at our church a few weeks ago. But Richard and I became friends. And then with the hospital, they asked me to transfer to Richmond, Virginia. Nancy and I picked up and moved. We had, at that time, one child, and her name is Anna, and she's married to you.
Yes.
And so you know her. But anyway, so we moved to Richmond, Virginia. And really, we did have some family there, and an aunt and an uncle. And so we moved there and worked at the hospital. And we were there for about 18 months, had just gotten a raise. Everything was wonderful with the job. And I walked in one day and they said, well, our numbers are down inside the hospital, so we're going to have to let you and everybody else with less than 5 years seniority go. So I said, wow, I'm fired. So, but they gave me a nice little check. That was good. So
Always good.
Always good to get a little check. So at that point, I was like, what am I going to do? So I called literally, less than 2 hours later, I called the president of Traco Plumbing in Florence, South Carolina. I knew him. I'd met him through my uncle. And I called him and said, look, Mr. Husband, I need a job. I said, I just got laid off by my company, and it was a mass layoff, not just me. And he said, well, listen, I can send you to Chicago, Illinois, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And of course, I said Baton Rouge. So we picked up and moved to Baton Rouge. I went to work for Traco Plumbing. I'd been called into the ministry, but yet I was not in the ministry. I was still active in church. I was still teaching. I was still involved in every aspect of ministry. And as I look back on those days, I think, well, God certainly had a reason for me to be involved in all those things.
Right.
So I'd be a better pastor. I was involved in teaching 8th grade boys Sunday school. I was involved in teaching single adults that were college students.
Okay.
I was involved with the nursery at one point. I was involved in the choir and ensembles. And so, we were very involved in the Streamer Baptist Church. In fact, we still have some really dear friends that live all over the United States that we went to church with in those years of the 90s, from 91 to about 97. And then in 97, the territory for Traco came open in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Well, that's where we wanted to be. At this point, we had 2 children, both of our girls. It's the only 2 children we have, and Ashlyn and Anna. And so their grandparents were super excited that we were going to move back to South Carolina. So we moved back to Myrtle Beach in 1997. Just before that, Nancy and I had gone to an Experiencing God weekend for couples in Baton Rouge. And I saw and met for the first time Henry and Marilyn Black. Well, of course, I knew Richard because we used to work together.
Right.
And so I went up to him and I said, hey, my name is Rob Pierce. I'm a friend of your son Richard's. We were in seminary together and we worked together on the night shift at the psychiatric hospital. I said, we were not patients. We actually worked there. So
not patients.
Yeah. So he looked at me and said, well, where are you serving? Where are you pastoring? And I
Right.
said, well, I'm not. He said, what are you doing? And I said, well, right now I'm selling shower heads, toilet seats, and valve parts to hotels like this one. We were in a hotel, Mount Ballroom, at the Radisson Hotel in Baton Rouge. And he said, well, why aren't you preaching? And I said, I got sidetracked with life. And he said, well, you need to understand something, Rob. He said, the call of God and the gifting of God, according to the Apostle Paul in Romans, is irrevocable. So you're either called into the ministry or you are not. You need to make a decision. Go with that decision. I said, wow. Well, he didn't know that we were literally about to move to Myrtle Beach. We had already made arrangements. We had started packing. We were within 2 weeks, 3 weeks of moving. So we moved to Myrtle Beach thinking we need to go ahead and move. I'd accepted this position with the company. And Myrtle Beach was a great territory for a salesman because I was a full commission salesman, which meant that if I didn't write an order, I didn't make any money.
Right.
And so moving to Myrtle Beach was great because I didn't have any money coming out of my pocket to stay in hotels. Back in Louisiana, I was literally in a hotel 3 or 4 nights a week.
Wow.
And so
that was coming out of pocket.
That was coming out of my pocket, just paying the bills in order to make the money.
Right.
So you say, well, yeah, you made a bunch of money, but if you had to take out a bunch just for your expenses, it gets a little crazy. So Myrtle Beach is going to be great because my territory was from Wilmington, North Carolina to Georgetown, South Carolina.
Okay.
So I didn't come inland at all except to Conway. That's as far inland as I came. So I lived in Myrtle Beach, but I could cover my whole territory very easily without traveling overnight. So that was good. So we started out in Little River, rented a house, and then after about a year, we bought a house in Myrtle Beach in the Forestbrook area because that was a lot closer. My wife, Nancy, had found a job at Calvary Christian School in Socastee.
Okay.
And that's where our children went to school. And so we were happy there. Things were going well. I had a new house. I had 2 new cars. I had a new set of golf clubs. Everything was wonderful. I was involved in church. I was at Ocean View Baptist Church. We had joined at Ocean View when Paul Mims was the pastor. After we were there for about a year, Paul retired, and the church called Steve Cromer to be the pastor. And so I was teaching Sunday school. I had a Sunday school class with 25 couples in it. I became a deacon at this church. I was involved in the choir and the ensembles. Bobby Hughley was the music director at that time. We were still in church. We were still serving God. We were still actively teaching the Word of God. But I was not preaching. I wasn't pastor. So was there in Myrtle Beach, and we were doing a men's ministry breakfast one Saturday morning. And at that breakfast, I was the men's ministry director that year. And so we're having this breakfast, and we got through, and we were cleaning up the kitchen because it was a nice, huge commercial kitchen that was used for the daycare during the week. So we had beautiful facilities. They still do, by the way. As we're cleaning up, Steve Cromer, my pastor, walks into the fellowship hall and he's crying. He had not been at the breakfast. He had been on vacation. And I didn't expect him at the breakfast because he'd been on vacation. But he explained to me that he was with his dad last night. They drove back from Spartanburg. They got back to Myrtle Beach, and as soon as they got back that morning, they got the call that his dad had passed away, that he had to leave and go right back to Spartanburg immediately. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Would you preach for me tomorrow?" And I said, "Yes, sir," without hesitation. Now, after I thought about it, I said, what have I done? I'm going to preach at Ocean View Baptist Church with 2 services, 600 to 700 people between the 2.
Wow.
Lots of tourists. I don't know how this is going to go. So I went home. And I thought, this would be easy. I'll just get one of my old sermons from seminary days or when I worked at the church during college. I preached a little bit. I'll get some of my old sermons. And so I remembered as I went to look for them in my office that we had a hurricane, Floyd, come through Myrtle Beach around 99, I think. And it had put 2 inches of water in my house. And so everything on the floor was gone. So I had to do something. All my papers from seminary, all my books, we had thrown them out, because they got in floodwater, soaked up floodwater. And so I had been with a group of men studying a book called When God Speaks. And so that Henry Blackaby, oddly enough, wrote, and his son Tom Blackaby wrote. And so I decided, well, you know what? I'm going to use one of those lessons as the outline for my sermon. Right. And so I preached that day to 2 different services. Like I said, 600 to 700 people. Don't know how many were there total. And I asked God, I said, God, if this is what you want me to do with my life, you got to make it clear. I need the flashing light. I need a neon light. I need a lightning strike. I need something. I need the Krispy Kreme red light to come on and blink just for me
to speak.
And so I preached that day, and I had some people respond publicly and come and pray with me, or the youth minister, associate pastor was there. Steve had asked me to preach because I was in his face right there in Convenience. He could have asked anybody to preach. He had a youth minister and an associate pastor. He had a minister of music. He had deacons that could preach. He had former pastors in the church, but he asked me to preach. At that point, now remember, I had not preached in 14 years.
Right.
So it was like, wow.
It's been a while.
Been a while. So I obviously preached that Sunday. All my friends that were in my Sunday school class, all my friends from church came up to me afterwards and said, "Why aren't you doing this full time?" Nobody said, "Great job. You did wonderful. I appreciated your illustrations," or "That point you made was awesome," or "Man, you really explained that scripture to me." Nothing like that at all. Everybody said, "Why aren't you doing this full time?" Okay. So I took that as, okay, God, I got the light. So Steve came back from his dad's funeral. So he and I went to breakfast. He just wanted to go have breakfast, talk to me. I wanted to talk to him, so it worked out good. He came and we had breakfast. I said, "Steve, it's time. It's time." I said, "I'm not unhappy with what I'm doing in life. I'm certainly not unhappy with the money I'm making. Of course. But I'm not doing what God designed for me to do." I said, "I want to put my resume out and see what happens." Right. Steve said, "Okay, where do you want to send it?" I said, "Well, my grandmother is a member at Somerton Baptist Church in Clarendon County." I said, "So let's send it there." Okay. And see what happens. Good idea. Well, I didn't know that Somerton, I knew they were without a pastor. They had been through like 60 resumes. And nobody had risen to the top yet. They'd interviewed guys. So they got mine and they thought, oh, wow. Because I put on there, of course, I was full disclosure. My grandfather was Walter B. Senn. Of course, he was dead at that point. I said, my grandmother's Eloise Senn. She's now in heaven, but at that point she was still alive. And so I didn't know if they would want to even talk to me because my grandparents were right there in church.
Right.
Well, some of those people actually remembered me from coming to visit my grandparents as a child, all of that. So I said, well, let's talk to him. So they came and talked to me, and I'll never forget Johnny Hill. Johnny's in poor health these days, but I remember Johnny interviewing me and Nancy with the rest of the committee at Red Lobster in Florence, South Carolina, and said, are you ready to go into the ministry? Are you ready? And I looked at him and said, Johnny, I'm readier now than I've ever been. I'm ready. Right. You know, I've gone through all this process of, God, is this what you want me to do? Been praying, felt led to do it.
Right.
Henry Blackaby had gotten in my face at the marriage retreat. He later said he wasn't that blunt. And I said, yeah, you were. You were. So anyway, we went ahead and decided we needed to make this move. And they called me to be their pastor January 1st, 2001.
Okay, 2001.
And so I was there for almost 9 years. And then through a series of circumstances, God moved and called us to Latta, South Carolina. Now, we didn't understand how he did all that and all those circumstances that went around us coming to Latta.
Right.
But when you look back on it, it's worked out great. Not only for my family, but for taking care of my in-laws.
Right.
My parents are only 20 miles away. They're aging now. And so it's worked out great for us to be available to take care of the parents instead of having to drive an hour and 15, 20 minutes, you know, and all those things.
Right.
Plus, it's worked great to have places especially with my in-laws, places for them to go with assisted living, and then eventually with a nursing home that were close by to us.
Right.
And where Nancy works, where you work at Dillon Christian School. So with the Pines. And so we look back on it and say, wow, God, we didn't understand it all at that time. We don't always understand everything while we're going through it. And I think that's indicative of Romans 8:28, where the Apostle Paul writes to the church. He's telling them, all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to his purpose. It might not have been a great thing that happened to you. It might have been an automobile accident. It might have been an illness. He doesn't say all things are good. He says all things work together for good. And then verse 29, of course, talks about the goodness is being conformed to the image of Jesus.
Yep.
So through those circumstances, I know it's a long answer to your question, but for those circumstances, that's what God did in allowing me to go into the ministry. Now, in 2009, I found out about Latta Baptist Church, and so they had gone through some terrible circumstances with their former pastor who took his own life, and that's horrible. You know, people get depressed and people go through things, and so that took place. I was told by someone, you need to send your resume there because you have experience. Remember, I worked in a psychiatric hospital. My undergraduate degree is in psychology. Right. I'm not a licensed professional counselor, but I have done some counseling as a pastor. They said, these people need someone like you because you sort of understand mental illness. You understand psychotropic medications, you know, so to a certain degree, I'm not a physician. But anyway, in 2009, October 1st, 2009, I became the pastor here at Latta Baptist Church. Again, not knowing how God was going to work all that out. We're almost 16 years later. Right. This October will be 16 years. It's like, wow. And for those of you listening to podcasts that don't know, in South Carolina Baptist life, your average length of stay for a pastor is about 2 years. To go 16 years, that's just a blessing to be in one town, one area. And I will say this, I've been, and we can talk about this another time, but I've been all over the world. I've been in all kinds of places, beautiful places, places that are just completely different. There's no place like home, you know.
That's true.
You think about the people that you're in contact with, people at church, people in the community. I was thinking today about restaurants. You know, I try to frequent our restaurants in Latta because I love those people.
Right. The food's good too.
Yeah, the food's awesome. Yeah. Today I ate at A&B Country Kitchen in Latta, and Brian and Angie Berry and their daughter April run that place, and the food was just amazing. Backbone and rice, you know, pork and rice. It was really good. I frequent King's Pizza as well because they do a good job with the Shot and the Sammy Khalil. That's not the kind of places you get if you live in typically a Florence or Columbia or Greenville or Charlotte. Right. You know, it's hard to go find they got them. You got to find them. They're out the way. But to find a home-cooked meal or something that's not just your normal chain meal, like Olive Garden or Chili's or, you know, Outback, they're all good. You know, not trying to throw them under the bus, but to have that home-cooked meal. And then when you live in Latta and in Dillon County, the prices are so much better, you know. You can go out to eat for a decent price. 2 people can eat really inexpensively. But if I go to Florence and eat, then the price goes up 30% automatically. You know, so we love living in Latta. We live near the downtown area, and so everything's walkable. You can walk around Latta very easily. And the church has done well. Obviously, like every church, we have ups and downs and attendance up and down and membership. But since COVID, and COVID sort of wiped everything clean because everybody had to basically start over.
Right.
But since COVID in 2020, when it really affected us, it was COVID-19 for 2019, but it didn't really get to the United States in 2020. But since COVID, things have picked up dramatically. You know, at first we had like 20 families had to come back to church. Now all of them have come back to church except for maybe one or two families. So
Right.
we're really excited about that. And plus we've had a lot of new families come into church the last 3 years, and it's been exciting to see that. The number of young people that we have, the youth, the number of children, that is super exciting to see. But that's more than you asked me. But I did want to answer that question about ministry because to me it's unique, I think, in a way, because as a pastor, I haven't always been a pastor. I've worked in high school. I worked at Chick-fil-A. Of course, I did like every high school student does. I cut grass. If you're from South Carolina, you probably cropped tobacco a couple of years. I did that. Also, working as a full commission salesman meant that I couldn't stay in bed. I had to get up at 4 or 5 and hit the road so I could be at my customers by 8 a.m. And when you live somewhere as vast and as big a territory as I had in Louisiana, you had to do that. Sometimes I'd leave at 4
Right.
to drive 4 hours to be at Barksdale Air Force Base at 8 or Fort Polk Army Base.
It's an early morning.
So, right. So it's I have an appreciation, is what I'm trying to say, as a pastor for the people in the congregation that actually go out and get up and have to be a school teacher or have to be in a factory or have to be at a plant or something of that nature. They have to go to work every day and or farm. We have some farmers in our church. The farmers are really busy right now. They're not laying around. They're starting, you know, at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and they're not stopping at 7:30, 8 o'clock at night because it's that time of year. So I respect that. I honor that. And I can relate, not to the farmer necessarily, but I can relate to some of that as far as having to get up and go to work every day and do whatever you need to do to feed your family, you know, and pay the mortgage.
Right. Now, you did mention something a little bit ago about working for the association. So another question that was given to us is, do you have, as a pastor, do you have any other jobs aside from being a pastor?
Yeah. Well, being a pastor is absolutely a full-time job. Some weeks you might not work as much as other weeks. I have had weeks, literally, where I've had people in the hospital all over the state of South Carolina. Where when I was in Somerton at one time, I had somebody in Sumter, somebody in Columbia, somebody in Florence, and somebody in Charleston. And Somerton is right in the middle of all that. So I just did a big loop one day, just took the whole day. Being a pastor is absolutely a full-time job because it's not set hours. It's not 9 to 5. You know,
Right.
I could be talking to someone on the phone or counseling somebody or whatever the case may be. In fact, I'll just give you one example. A couple of weeks ago, about 2 weeks ago, I had, within 5 days, I had 2 men come by my house, 2 individuals, 2 separate incidents where they came in and needed to talk because God was speaking to their heart about something in their life.
Wow.
And that's just, you know, I'm already at home. I'm in my shorts. You know, I'm just chilling out watching Wheel of Fortune or whatever. It's like, hey, can I come by? Well, I'm never going to say no to that. If I'm in town, come by. That's fine. Love to talk, especially when God's speaking to you. To answer your question, yeah, I do some other things outside of the pastorate, but my pastorate, my job as a pastor is always first. I don't work somewhere like a Chick-fil-A or McDonald's or anything like that, but I do. But I've made some good contacts with folks at the Baptist Foundation in South Carolina. The Baptist Foundation is pretty cool because they not only handle the money for the our state denomination, and for Charleston Southern and Anderson, North Greenville, and Connie Maxwell Children's Home and the Homes for Aging, but they also handle churches' money. You know, for instance, if anybody's listening, they're familiar with Camp Pine Hill.
Right.
Camp Pine Hill has a fund where people have given to it over the years, and every year they take the interest off of that fund and use it at Camp Pine Hill. Sometimes it's as much as $10,000.
Wow.
And so the Baptist Foundation is pretty cool. The other cool thing is if the church invests money there or an individual, you know it's going to be clean. It's not going to be invested in alcohol, tobacco, pornography, or anything like that. So
Right.
you know it's clean. The Baptist Foundation hired me to just go have lunch with pastors.
Wow.
And so that's been pretty cool because it really doesn't take any time away, because I'm going to go eat lunch anyway,
Right.
typically. It doesn't take time away from the pastor. The only difference is I have to actually plan. You know, I just don't, typically I will do it occasionally, just call up somebody and say, hey, you want to go to lunch? But typically what I do is just, I don't write any loans. I don't tell them how to invest money. That's not my pot of gold or pot of tea or whatever. But my job is to just give them the brochure and say, hey, if you need the services of the Baptist Foundation, we're here for you.
Right.
The Baptist Foundation, we have 2,200 churches in South Carolina. And so the Baptist Foundation wants to make sure the churches know that they have some new services available, including investing funds, as well as they now lend money to churches. Not individuals, just churches. But individuals can invest with the Baptist Foundation if they're South Carolina Baptists. They can invest. Okay. And they can invest in several different ways, but just their basic savings account paying 5% right now. And that's pretty doggone good compared to most banks. So, but the cool part is all of their financial stuff is for kingdom purposes, for kingdom growth, for the Great Commission. So they're not doing it just to line the pockets of the CEO or whatever. No, all of that money stays that you invest it's lent out to churches, and the money they pay back, the interest, goes back into the pot. So it's just a continuous cycle of trying to help churches accomplish the Great Commission. So I love that about Nathan McCarthy, the CEO, and his desire, because to him it's not about the number of loans you write, or I don't write them, but whoever, or how much is invested, or how many accounts you got. And he made a good point one time in talking to him. He said, when it comes to the end of the day, and I get to heaven, I don't think God's going to ask me or tell me, good job for the number of accounts you got.
Right.
It's going to be, good job in helping fund the Great Commission in churches.
Making sure people
hear the message.
Right.
And they do that through people in the church. And churches, unfortunately, we live in a fallen world, so air conditioners break, roofs leak. So churches like our own. At one time, we had to borrow money several years ago when we had a leak in the roof and didn't know it. Right. And the sheetrock crumbled in the roof, in the roof of the ceiling of the sanctuary. And it turned out to be a $50,000 repair. Right. And so we had to borrow the money, but we paid it back pretty quick. At that time, the foundation wasn't lending money, but we didn't know about it. But now, today, that would be the first people I would contact just to say, hey, here's our situation. See what we can do to help, Yep. But yeah, I enjoy my work with them. And like I said, it's usually just taking somebody to lunch once or twice a week.
Okay. Good deal.
Because I like to eat.
Yeah, eating's fun. I enjoy eating. Some other questions that were raised today, even. How do you maintain and even improve your skills as a pastor? Would you say that's focused on studying God's Word more, or focused more on the public speaking side of things?
I think it's more on my relationship with the Lord. I have to take time out occasionally, a block of time. Like I go to the Cove a lot, about once a year, or sometimes I just go down to the beach and just focus on what God wants me to do and what He wants me to speak on and what He wants me to address. But my focus when I go on those little excursions is basically my relationship, my personal relationship with the Lord Jesus, trying to make sure that relationship is intimate, personal, and vibrant. So I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for or not, but yeah, it's I don't focus on public speaking. I don't focus on presentation. I don't focus on my hairdo. It just sort of does what it wants to. But I just try to focus on my relationship with Him.
Okay. So speaking of which, how do you feel, or have you ever had this instance happen, but how do you feel if God leads you to take your message in a different direction?
That's happened a couple of times. It doesn't happen a lot, but it has happened a couple of times. Sometimes while I'm preaching, it happens, where God says, you need to hit on this a little bit harder. What has happened to me probably 10 times in 25 years is that I'll have a message prepared and then something will happen. And then I need to change my message on Saturday. Now, that might be a death in the church.
Right.
We've had that, might be something traumatic, like a death because of a traffic accident or something, or the death of a child.
Right.
It could be any number of things. Could be someone took their own life, something of that nature that would be horrible. There are times when COVID hit, that was one of those times. That was one of the times that sort of, we didn't know, as a pastor, I'm a human being like everybody else. I didn't know what was going to happen.
Right.
I didn't know if we was going to have to just shut down the church and no offerings and no income, and I didn't know what was going to happen.
It was kind of confusing time for everybody, right?
So it's like, wow, what do you do? And it was confusing for a lot of people in leadership, governors and county councilmen and all that. They didn't know what to do. We didn't know how to respond to something. We'd never been through anything like that. I think now that we've been through it, we sort of understand some things about diseases and things like that. Sometimes it just needs to play itself out, to build immunity in a natural way. But, having friends that died, personal friends of mine that died from COVID, it was scary because I didn't want anybody to get COVID,
Right.
And then some people responded to COVID by dying. Some people were very, very sick. Some were not. I got it as well. I had a transfusion that was experimental. It worked beautifully. Right, but what would happen if it went the other way, Yep. Yeah, sometimes there are times that something happens. That obviously, I was a pastor during the terrorist attacks on September the 11th, 2001. I remember that very well. And so, yeah, that changed my whole sermon that week.
Sure.
And for several weeks in advance. But, yeah, there are times that you have to respond to what's affecting your church, your community, and your people.
Of course. So, speaking of which, like, I guess from a more personal perspective, what goes through your head as you're preaching?
Wow.
It's a loaded question, right?
Yeah. What goes through my head? I print out my messages on a computer. I write them up to where you could actually read them.
Right.
And they would make sense to you. I do that, but I don't read them when I preach.
Of course.
I just read the highlights, and I highlight verbs and things of that nature. But when I'm preaching, I'm trying to stay on task for two reasons. Number one, at our church, we have an 8:30 service and we have an 11 o'clock service. And in between those two services, we have Sunday school. So I have to make sure that my sermons are finished up at the latest. It starts at 8:30. I got to be done by 9:45 because Sunday school starting. So I try to finish by 9:30, 9:35, something like that. And I know that if I've typed out 10 pages, that's usually about 30 minutes. Okay. So, but if I get caught up on a point and go past my, sometimes I go a little bit over.
Right.
But typically I try to stay within that parameters. And another reason is people can't process information. You can only sit there and listen to somebody lecture for so many minutes before your mind is drifting about where am I going to lunch or where's the coffee and, all that stuff. When I'm preaching, if I'm distracted by somebody getting up or somebody coming in the door late or something like that, yes, certainly that could distract me, but I try not to allow it to distract me very much because that's always going to happen. Every Sunday's going to happen. Right. Somebody's got to get up or somebody comes in late, whatever the case may be. While I'm preaching, any number of things could pop in my mind, but normally it's about the message, what I'm preaching. Yes. One of the things that I don't want to do, and this is pretty good for any pastor, when I'm preaching a message, I'm not writing that message for a particular individual in my church. Let's say that the subject is adultery today. Well, I'm not going to preach on adultery specifically to that person in the audience that I know or the church that has committed adultery in their life. Right. That's not my goal. Okay? Now, if I'm preaching on adultery and they fall under conviction, that's the Holy Spirit. That ain't Rob Pierce. Right. But my goal is to present the truth of God's Word, regardless of how it falls out. Now, it works both ways. One day, I was preaching on stewardship, money, of all things. And I had a guy surrender his life to the ministry that day. Wow. And I'm like, how did you get the ministry call out of a lesson on stewardship? That makes no sense at all. I mean, they're two different subjects. Right. But that's God. God can do that. God, I've had people literally walk out the church and say, God spoke to me today. Right. That wasn't Rob Pierce. That's God. Right. I've also had people walk out of church and say, that was horrible. I have. I've actually had it happen. And just once. And said, hey, and this was a visitor down in Summerton. He said, your content's great, but what your delivery is horrible. And he walked off. Yeah, he just thought it should be more charismatic than what you were presenting. What I presented, right? Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned not setting up a topic based on one individual. So how do you choose a topic? How do you go through the process of narrowing down what you're going to speak on for a Sunday or a series of Sundays?
Right. For instance, right now we're in a series. We're taping this after Easter, and Easter obviously was on the cross of Christ, and I sort of played off of that for a couple of weeks regarding the victory and the power of the cross of Christ. But that's just because I felt led to go that direction. A lot of times I may be reading a book, like I'm reading 3 books right now.
Which books are you reading?
Well, I'm reading on the Power of the Cross by Tony Evans. Okay. And I was reading on Experiencing the Cross by Henry and Mel Black. So I'm doing that. And then if I feel like, well, I could use this in a sermon, I'll use it. Okay. And I always try to give, recognition. I don't want to plagiarize. Right. I just say, I got this from the book I'm reading or whatever, right. Like we did Experiencing God. If the person was in the audience, in the congregation doing Experiencing God with us for those 12 weeks, they certainly picked up on some of the things I said was what Henry Blackaby wrote. Right. Because I would say in the sermon, Blackaby says, you cannot stay where you are and go with God. That's just an example. I think that as a pastor, you have to continue to read, continue to study, and continue to stay fresh. The subject matter could change if there's a crisis in the church or like COVID, like we talked about. Right. What I've been trying to do, and of course the subject matter does change on special Sundays like Mother's Day, Graduate Recognition Sunday coming up, those types of things, Father's Day. Right. Christmas, Thanksgiving, those types of things. Or maybe a special anniversary in the church, like we have homecoming in October. Right. Stuff like that. But typically I try to write my messages 2 or 3 weeks in advance. That way, if something happens that week, I have had as many as 3 funerals in 1 week. On a personal level, it's the most difficult. After I've written the sermon and all that, I have to do the PowerPoint And so I'm not real fast at that. It takes me a little while to do it, to get it done. Yeah.
Right, of course. Well, listen, Pastor Rob, we again are super excited to have you here with us, and we're actually about to close out on our time. But as we do that, I want you to go back in time. I want you to tell us, what is your favorite memory from church as a child?
I have several. My first one would be when I was baptized and when I came to Christ at 10 years old at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Florence, South Carolina. This was back when it was located on East Palmetto Street. If you're familiar with Florence, it'd be right across from where McLeod's Hospital is. There's a Kentucky Fried Chicken there, and it's still there. It was there when I was a child.
Yep.
And
livers and gizzards.
That's right. That's right. And right next door now is a medical clinic, but that's where the church stood. Okay. And then the second thing was right after I was baptized at that church, the next year, they actually moved locations to the current location of Emmanuel Baptist on Cherokee Road.
Yes.
So that was pretty cool because we actually walked one Sunday morning from the old location to the new location.
Okay.
And at the time, they'd sold the old location to another church, and I think they later built a church somewhere else and sold out to the medical facility that's there now. But anyway, that was a great memory. David Egerton was my RA leader, Royal Ambassador leader.
Yes, sir.
He's the guy that led me to the Lord, and he's the guy that I kept in touch with over the years and helped me through the awkward teenage years and all of those things.
Right.
His wife was the organist at our church, Linda, and he's now with the Lord. Just memories of him and Jim Fincher, who helped raise me there at the church, and Jerry Aiken, who's now with the Lord, who was my pastor. Like I said, all those years from the time I was born until the time I left to go to college. So my favorite memories are those childhood memories.
Okay.
Growing up, yeah.
Right. Very cool. Very cool. Well, again, we just want to thank you for being here with us.
Well, man, it's been a pleasure.
And we look forward to hopefully doing this again with you, okay?
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's bring some more food next time.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys.
Be good.